My presentation today is talking about the journey from corporate aviation icon to corporate con. Walter Beech as an instructor and engineering pilot, and then joined the Swallow Aircraft Company in 1922. After that, he and Clyde Cessna and Lloyd Stearman, three very well-known names in aviation history, formed the Travel Air Company. And they did that in 1925. And they made the bi-wing Travel Air. They made several models. In fact, if you go out to Gillespie Field, there's a Travel Air being flown out there right now for demonstration rides. It's quite something. Curtis Wright bought Travel Air in the late 20s, and Beech became a vice president for that organization. And then in 1931-1932 time period, he sold his stock in Curtis Wright and formed the Beech Aircraft Company in East Wichita, Kansas. In fact, he rented one of the hangars that Curtis Wright had for the assembly of their aircraft to start the production of his airplane. He hired a secretary named Olive Ann Beech, and she and Walter ran the company from that time on until he passed away in 1950. The byline here is the integrity of the product design and product improvement. What fascinated me more than anything about my time with Beech Aircraft was the quality of the product that they made. Just by example, the current airplanes that I happen to fly is a Beech Bonanza. It has a twin spar wing, corrugated controlling surfaces, and a canted engine. When you look and compare that airplane and its design to the Pipers or the Cessnas, it's quite materially different construction. In fact, most of the airplanes now are under the utility category instead of the normal category of construction. And Walter was very proud of that. Olive Ann joined him, and she ultimately became co-founder and president and chairwoman of the Beech Aircraft Company, and of course the First Lady of Aviation. Their first airplane was the Stagger wing, built in 1932. We have the Stagger wing of Baron Hilton's, and you may have all seen it. It's out the Gillespie Field. And they built over, and I'll go to that right now, and show you what it flies like. Some of the enduring qualities of his first airplane that he produced was the Stagger wing. And the reason that the Stagger wing was set back on the top was to give better visibility for the pilot. It was also a retractable landing gear, and it also had a variable pitch prop. This is in 1932. And it was the first airplane the Army got or received that went over 200 miles an hour. And to prove, they sold over 700 of them, but to show off the airplane, Louise Thatton was the first woman to win the Bendix Trophy for speeds in excess of 200 miles an hour. So you can think about that. 1932, 1933, this is the airplane, his first airplane that he came out with, which was quite extraordinary. Following that airplane, we're talking about the evolution of product development at the Beech Aircraft Company. Walter came out with the Beech AT. That was a twin-engine airplane. He built over I have 7,000 of them there. 3 of the versions of that B-17 was the AT-7 Navigator, a separate airplane that teaches the Navigators. The Norton bomb sight was in that airplane. The A-10, the wood-fabricated airplane for the pilot, did need metal. And then the Bombardier, the A-11 Bombardier gunnery airplane. 3 separate airplanes off the configuration of the Beech 18 to teach, to be instructor aircraft for the Army. Along that period between 1941 and 1945, the Beech Company was awarded the E Award for excellence in production of war equipment. They got it 5 different times. I'm going to show you now the Beech 18. Typical flight routine.
Is that you flying it?
That's me, in the left seat. You can imagine that airplane was probably developed, produced somewhere between the early 1940s to maybe 1945, 1946. So structurally speaking, to do that kind of stress on the airplane at this time is extraordinary. After World War II, Beech's major concern, Walter Beech's major concern with Aviation of keeping their trained labor force at the factory. The fact that they weren't going to produce any more airplanes, war-related airplanes, if you will, like the Beech 18 and the C-45, they went into the electric car business. They call it the Plains Electric Drive Automobile, which is quite extraordinary, I think, when you consider the time as 1945, 1946 time period. They also made, and I couldn't find it, but they made a wheat thrasher machine for the Kansas farmers, all along trying to keep folks in the factory producing products that they could sell to the marketplace. Their first post-war airplane was my favorite, the Bonanza V-tail, and it was designed by Ted Bell, and it was first designed and put into production in 1945-1946 time period. What's extraordinary to me is the plane has been in continuous production since 1945. Every year, they never stopped. And they started with the V-tail in 1945. Then they went on and made the Baron, which was a twin-engine airplane, the similar B-55 Baron, a five-place. It is also still in production. The Bonanza went from a 4-place to a 5-place to a 6-place. The Baron went from a 4-place to a 6-place. Both airplanes are still in production. Along with that, we're talking about Terry Brennan. Terry has the T-34A, I believe, which was a primary trainer for the Navy and the Air Force. Then the Air Force and Navy put in a turboprop piston airplane, a turboprop airplane for the T-34C, and those were primary trainers for both corps. In the late 50s, Beech went into the competition with the Air Force for a request, basically a request for proposal for an all-jet trainer. And they introduced the Jet Mentor, and it competed against the T-37. And ultimately, as Ron knows, he flew the T-37. It won out on the program. Following that, they went into cabin class airplanes. Remember, they made the Beech 18, which held 7 people in the cabin. Then they went to the cabin class Queen Air. So this was a cabin class airplane with Lycoming engines. And subsequent to that, Pratt & Whitney went to them and said, look, we can put a turbine engine on a Queen Air. Would you be interested? They said, absolutely. So they went from the Queen Air with pistons to the King Air with turboprops and pressurized, and that was the King Air 90. You see, I missed that last one. Yeah. Then they extended it with the passenger, what they call a Part 121 aircraft, commuter airline, the Beech 99 with 13 passengers, and ultimately went to the Beech 1900 C and D, and I'm sure maybe at some point or another you've all flown in that commuter airline. Mesa Airlines flew it, United Express flew it. I flew it. And then to get into the jet business, they became the dealer in the United States for Hawker Siddeley. And Hawker Siddeley made a mid-range airplane, the Hawker 125-400 and the Hawker 125-500. And it would be an airplane that would fly from Los Angeles to Chicago, Chicago to New York, Chicago to Miami, that type of thing. And they got into that mid-range because they had not yet developed their own airplane. Now comes the clash in Beech Aircraft. In 1980, and I'll backtrack just a minute, in 1980, Beech was approached by the Raytheon company. Raytheon, of course, builds things that go one way, missiles primarily. And they were having a lull in the defense business, so they said maybe we get into the corporate aviation business, albeit Piper Aircraft, Cessna Aircraft. They approached Olive Ann Beech and asked if she would have an interest in selling the company. I wanted to share with you, and you saw it probably on the previous slide, Walter died of encephalitis of the brain in 1950. So essentially, after the war was over, Olive Ann really took over the command of the company. So in 1980, Olive Ann and her board approved the purchase of Raytheon buying the company for $260 million. So at that point, building over 50,000 airplanes, they turned the reins of the company over to Raytheon. Olive Ann went on board. She was on the board for 2 years and then retired. And the issue then became this evolution to revolution in product design. And this is really what I think took them under, in my estimate. Because in 1983, Bert Rattan, Scale Composites out in Mojave, approached the Raytheon Aircraft Company and Lyndon Blue, who happened to be the vice president of Raytheon at the time, about a Long Easy upgrade. I don't know if you've ever seen the Long Easy. It's got the canard in the front, winglets and the tail, pusher tail motor in the aft section. And they presented that proposal of development to the board of Raytheon. And instead of improving upon the King Air product line, which they've been doing this whole evolution, they said, no, we're gonna jump the fence and go into something quite different. We're not gonna go to jets, right, like Cessna did and like Piper did. We're gonna go with a faster, higher altitude King Air type product with the Starship. So the Starship came in 1985 time period, all composite. All composite. The wing was composite. The fuselage, the empennage, everything on the airplane other than the engine nacelles were practically the engine nacelles were composite. And so we call that not an evolution from a King Air, but an absolute revolution. It's a giant leap from a design point of view. Well, what happened? Well, I'll go fly this for you, and then I'll tell you. So what happened, and I'll back that up, what happened, see if I can back that up a little bit. So what happened? They put the design out to the FAA in 1985 with the whole basis of using composites. They built a Plant 3 at the factory in Wichita with the huge autoclaves to cure the composite structures. The FAA had never approved a composite airplane before for corporate aviation. As you know today, Boeing Aircraft has a 787, which is primarily composite. The FAA had approved surface controls on airplanes like flaps and ailerons and elevators and that type of thing for existing Boeing aircraft, but they never approved a full deposit. As they got into the inspection of the airplane, when they thought or didn't have confidence with the way the weight was attached to the fuselage, they added more fiber. They added more resin. So taking an airplane like this, which was spec'd at 12,500 pounds, single pilot, 41,000 foot elevation, 375 knots, 1,700 nautical mile endurance. That was the airplane. The FAA, when they got through with it, it became a 15,000 pound airplane. Okay, it barely got to 41,000 feet and couldn't carry much. It could carry me and another pilot in the front seat and maybe 3 or 4 people in the back, and maybe get from LA to Dallas, maybe. So they missed the mark. And needless to say, it cost them dearly. I said it cost them $400 million in development costs. Raytheon paid $230 million for the company. They lose $400 million, they build 53 of them. So at the same time they're building the Starship, they said maybe we ought to get into the jet business. But you know, to get into the jet business is probably a 45-year period of time if you're doing a clean sheet development of an airplane, 4 to 5 years. So Mitsubishi Heavy Industries comes to Beech. They're assembling their airplane in San Angelo, Texas. And they said, would you might want to buy our Diamond 1A and our MU-2 Rice rocket? And said, well, let's take a look at that. They didn't buy the MU-2 turboprop Rice rocket, but they did buy the Diamond 1A. And they took it from San Angelo, took all the parts, design work, and fabrication work up to Wichita, and they renamed the airplane the Beechjet 400A. It was very successful in the market. We were late to the dance. They sold 300 of those airplanes to the Air Force, and they called it the T-1A Jayhawk. So if you were in the Air Force in the pilot program and you didn't go to jet fighters, like the F-4 or what have you, or the F-15, but you wanted to go to transports, the C-141 or the C-5 or the C-17, this was the airplane you learned how to fly in. The student was in the left seat, you had the instructor in the right seat, and you had a second student in the middle between them sitting behind you. And then that's the airplane that they flew. In continuation of doing work with the Air Force and the Navy, they built the T-6A primary trainer, and that is still in production right now. And I'll see if I can get that to go forward. Here it is. In addition, for diversification purposes in the 80s, they also built a supersonic Mach 3 target drone. We have a drone in here. I don't think it's a Beech drone, but very similar, Mach 3, as a diversification product. And interestingly enough, in my research, I discovered that they did the cryogenics loading and transfer containers from Gemini, Apollo, and the lab. And what I don't know is, and what I wasn't able to find out is whether on Apollo 13, then in 1993, after taking on the Beechjet, Raytheon bought Hawker Siddeley. Hawker Siddeley was in Chester, England, where they built the airplane, and we brought all the parts and the fabrication equipment over to Wichita, and so we got into the mid-range business. The light-range business was the Beechjet Diamond 400A, and they got into the Hawker in 1993-94, building several models, the 800, the 900, the 1000, and the 4000. Now, these airplanes went cross-country, and the Hawker 4000 went, for example, from Teterboro over to London, or if you would, Oakland over to Hawaii. So it gave you that longer range approach. I happened to join Raytheon in 1994 at Hobby Field and had the opportunity of selling both of these airplanes. Here again, we talk about evolution to revolution. Both of these airplanes, the Hawker 4000 and the Premier 1, the Premier 1 being the light jet, the Hawker 4000 being the long-range jet, both used carbon fiber fuselages. But they didn't go with the all-carbon wing, they went back to the metal wing. And again, the leap of faith of being able to feel that you could get this approved by the FAA was very daunting. It took an extraordinary time to get both airplanes certified and a considerable amount of treasury on their behalf to get them out into the marketplace. They were able to get out the Premier earlier. They sold over 300 of those airplanes, but the Hawker 4000, the big one on top, it was late by 3 years into the marketplace behind the likes of docent, Dassault, and Bombardier with their corporate jets, and it only sold 71 of the airplanes. So this whole idea of leapfrogging and going into a technology they weren't familiar with or comfortable with cost them dearly. There's the story in a nutshell. Raytheon comes in, visits with Ollie Van, says, we'd like to buy your company for $260 million. Raytheon then sells the company in 2006 to Goldman Sachs. Raytheon, now they're getting out of the business. Their defense business is growing, so they're saying, hey, I don't need to be in corporate aviation anymore. They sell it for 3.7. In 2010, right after the market crashes, corporate aviation market crashes, they file bankruptcy and sell the remaining assets back to Cessna, which is owned by Textron. I mean, what a sight. So what we have is we've got Walter Beech diversifying his company and still keeping the legacy products available to us today through the banner of Textron and Cessna. We still build the set, they still build the Bonanza, the A36, the Baron 58, and of course the King Air 350. I have that. Let's see if I can show that to you. There you have it, and I want to thank Dudley for helping me with this program over the last year and a half to get through all the paginations. And it was a pleasure